that.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Warm greetings to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining our webinar, and on behalf of the organizing committee, we extend our appreciation for your presence here today. My name is Shalima Mohammed, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. The subject matter of today's webinar is Unpacking Fraud Investigations for Corporate Organizations. From my far left is Mr. Eric Onyango, a manager of fraud and compliance. Then we have Mr. Simon Kariuki, head of security and investigations, I&M Bankhouse. We have Michael Omuga, manager cyber security and digital forensics. We have Martha Njeri, forensic accountant. We have Faith Wanjuki, manager forensics audit and investigations. Where I was raised in an environment where we were taught to believe that it's better to fail with honor than to succeed by fraud. My mentors taught me that when you see fraud and you don't call out for fraud, then you are a fraud. That being said, Mr. Eric Onyango, manager compliance and fraud, briefly introduce to us the meaning of fraud.
Thank you, Shalima, the moderator. I'll begin by defining fraud as outlined in the Black's Law dictionary, that fraud is an act or acts of intentional dishonesty or deceit perpetrated by an individual, individuals or an organization, basically for financial gain or unfair advantage.
Okay, Mr. Eric, so you've mentioned the word unfair advantage, you've mentioned the word deception, you've mentioned the word deceit. Does concealment of information and false representation amount to fraud?
Yes, concealment of information, that is when a person decides not to disclose a fact that otherwise can be material to any other discussion. So when somebody conceals material fact, then that amounts to fraud.
That is well noted, Mr. Eric. So for example, if person A enters into a contract, a business transaction contract with person B, and person B does not disclose to person A, the person whom he supplies goods with, that his company is under financial distress, and person A ends up supplying goods to person B without knowing that this person B's company is under financial distress, and at the end of the road person B refuses or rather fail to pay that outstanding amount, does that amount to fraud?
Yes, that will amount to fraud. Basically, there is information that is not disclosed in this agreement, and with that information that is concealed, the other party decided to rely on that information, and it means also there was dishonesty. So basically we're talking about intent and intentional dishonesty. So that would amount to fraud.
Thank you, Mr. Eric. So if person A, if it reaches a point where person A realizes that person B was under financial distress when person B was ordering goods from my end, can he escalate, when he escalates the court, before even escalating the matter to court, can he vary or rather discharge the contract they had entered to?
Yes, a contract can be discharged if it was obtained by fraud. So there is a recourse for discharging that contract.
So at what point does this person A determines whether person B was under financial distress? For example, person A is supplying person B with goods, right? But he's not in a position to know whether financial distress, and person B does not share that or rather discloses that information. how is person A expected to know whether person B is under financial or not? Because as a lawyer, an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, we come across several cases whereby our client supplies his goods to their clients, and at the end of the day, their customers, or rather their clients, are unable to pay back whatever goods they were delivered to them.
Thank you. As investigation, we have a recourse for that scenario, because you can do two things. One, you can decide to initiate an investigation, because he who alleges must substantiate. So it's only through an investigation that you can get to the facts of the allegation and use those facts or proof to proceed maybe to court. But it's also good to notice that prevention is better than cure. So as that agreement or contract, it's better to conduct a due diligence to ensure that you've taken due care and you've also verified information that you've been given, so that you don't end up getting or being defrauded.
So what you are saying is how person A can prove that person B was under financial distress at the time it was requesting to be supplied with goods by hiring an investigating officer.
Okay, so the way you can prove that, it's first is through an investigation. So when you get to investigate the matter, the investigators will look at either the documentations that were provided.
Statement of accounts, you mean?
Yes.
Of that company which had requested for the goods.
Yes. They can get to review them with an aim of finding whether there are discrepancies. And also the investigation can proceed to see whether there are some transfer sales during that period, to try substantiate that the sale or the transfer had an intent based on the circumstance of the matter. And also a review of all that was supplied during that particular period would basically bring about you getting to know all the facts that you need to proceed with.
So without wasting time, as you've put it, there are two remedies. One, you can hire an investigator to investigate the statement of accounts of that particular company at the time they were ordering to be supplied with the goods. Two, you can do your due diligence even before you supply that person with the goods.
Yes, that's true.
Thank you, Mr. Eric. Moving on. As an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, there's this authority which I came across, and it's a Court of Appeal authority decision, and it says that it is not allowable to leave fraud to be inferred from the facts. Fraudulent conduct must be distinctly alleged and distinctly proved. Mr. Mike, kindly introduce us to the major element.
Okay, thank you, Moderator Salim. Fraud has elements, and one common element of fraud is fraudster and a victim.
Kindly elaborate to us. Is there a difference between the two? What's the meaning?
Yeah, there's a difference. A fraudster is someone who engages himself in fraud, who has an intention of fraudulent minds. His or her aim is just to cause damage and also cause negative reputation to the victim. These people, they are the people who have also the knowledge on how they can approach the victim with false misrepresentation and also the false information to achieve also to gain what they want to gain. When it comes to the victim, victims are the people who are induced by the by the statement and also the methodology from the fraudsters. They are the people who also have experienced the damage, and also this one leads them to distress, and at the same time it also leave them with the financial crisis. And most of the times you will realize that most of these victims, they're the people who don't have more information about fraud, because fraudsters, they are people, they are smart people, let me use that term, because they know how to meander around and also get the information from the victim in the way that they are not sure of what they are giving out. Yes.
Okay. Now, following the words of Mr. Mike, it sounds that fraud, there's no doubt that fraud is a very serious crime. Faith, do you have anything to add to the major element of fraud?
Thank you, Mr. Shalima, for that question. And I'd like to write on Michael's explanation in terms of a key element of fraud being having a fraudster and a victim. In addition to that, the fraudster knowingly presents a false statement as a material statement. What do I mean by this? What I mean by this is the perpetrator, in this case who's the fraudster, will withhold some information or give some deceiving information to the victim, so that the victim then makes a judgment based on this false information. So there's the aspect of deception, and there's the false statements being brought out as a material fact, whereas it's not.
Well, concealment of information, deception, deceit. Well, that rhymes very well with what Mr. Eric Onyango had previously said at the beginning of the webinar. Martha, are there any other elements of fraud?
Okay, thank you, Shalima. One thing about fraud is that it's a very elaborate thing, although it may not be elaborate to everyone. So in matters of all the elements, I believe we have mentioned them here and there. Material fact, the falsity of the statement, and also the frauds are being very much aware, is mentioned by Faith. And also the fact that we talked of deceit, there has to be the action of deceit, right? As Eric elaborated. So there has to be a reliance on it, a justifiable reliance that shows that indeed the victim did rely on this false assertion while they were making their decision or in their dealings. Yeah. So I believe fraud may be wide, but it has very specific elements that point out that this is indeed fraud.
Thank you very much, Martha. Without wasting time, Mr. Mike, do you have anything to add before we move on to the next question?
Yes, thank you, Salima. Yes, I have something to add. And then when it comes to elements of fraud, we can also look at now the reliance of the presentation results, which can also cause damage and also to the victim. So you realize that this is a way on how the victim give trust in what the information he or she is getting from the fraudster, not knowing that it is misrepresentation, and also it is just used to induce the victim to at least to give his or her maybe, for example, credentials, which can cause the damage in terms of the financial crisis. At the same time, it can also cause the damage of the reputation. Yes. So reliance on a false representation results is also an element which contribute.
Okay, fraud and its elements. That's what our able, versatile, motivated, and educated speakers have to say about that. Back to our manager, fraud and compliance, Mr. Eric Onyango. It's my understanding that fraud is categorized into many categories. Kindly share with us briefly, what are the categories of fraud?
Thank you, Shalima. In the investigation world, we can categorize fraud into three major categories. That should be fraud categorized as corruption, asset misappropriation, and fraudulent statements. Those are the three major categories.
Kindly assist us in understanding these three major categories of fraud.
Yes, this is a key thing that we can take home When we usually refer to corruption, what do we really mean? We mean conflict of interest, bribery, illegal gratuities, and even extortion. That is corruption. There is also the asset misappropriation, which is basically can be categorized into cash, inventories, and other assets. So when you refer to the asset misappropriation, which is basically cash, you'll think of things like theft of cash on hand, the cash you have, or the company has. You can think of theft of cash receipts, and you can also think of fraudulent disbursements. Then basically when you refer to the assets, you look at misuse of maybe company assets, yes, and even stealing them, yeah, which we normally refer to as licensing.
For someone to be in a position to misuse company's assets, or rather to steal from the company, does that person has to be in a position of power or authority?
So that's a good question, and I can also give this key takeaway that there's a difference between corruption and asset misappropriation.
From your explanation, what I got is that in both asset misappropriation and corruption, someone has to be in a position of power or authority.
Not really, because when you refer to asset misappropriation, this is basically an employee using the company resources for personal gain. That is the asset misappropriation. Then when you cross over to corruption, this is where somebody in authority or in a position uses that position or authority to actually gain personally. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. That is well understood. Now, you had mentioned 3 categories, but you have only explained 2. Faith and Martha, kindly do assist us in elaborating the 3rd category.
Thank you, Shalima. I'll elaborate on the financial statement frauds. And just to give a highlight of what that is, it is the deliberate misrepresentation of the financial statements of the the financial position of a company. So how does this happen? So how that happens is through the manipulation or falsification of the accounting records. There is also the element of intentional misrepresentation of the financial statements, or even intentional misapplication of the accounting principles when preparing the financial accounts. So when you look at these areas, there are various schemes that fraudsters often use to conceal financial statement data, and these can range from overstated assets and revenues, understated liabilities, expenses, inclusive of others, which my colleague can speak to.
Just to add on what Faith has said, in the aspect of financial statement fraud, we have the three most common financial statements that we focus on: the income statement, the cash flow statement, and the statement of financial position. Now, in those 3 statements, the aspects that are recorded on them are the assets, the revenue, the obligations, which you commonly know as the liabilities, and the cash flow. So when there is a fraudulent financial statement, what happens? Those 4 things have been touched on, either understated or overstated, and in most cases, it's always to either make the company look more successful or make the management seem like they are making a lot of revenue. Mostly applies in companies whose business model is centered on sales incentives. So we have several examples whereby we have improper valuations of the assets, where an asset has been overvalued, the depreciation schedule is totally ignored, so the asset appears to be of a higher net worth, as as opposed to what it actually is. We also have cases where revenues are either overstated or understated. In the case of overstated, we can have like fake revenues, a revenue that hasn't occurred but has been recorded on the books, or a revenue that occurred but the amount has been overstated. It's not the exact amount, yeah? We also have cases where obligations like loans, instead of them being listed as liabilities in the books, they are listed as revenues in the books. So now that is deceitful to whoever uses the financial statement. We have so many cases of also companies having fictitious sales. So fictitious sales is events where there has been no sale, but there has been a record of a sale that hasn't occurred per se. Yeah, so generally it's manipulation of those four aspects. So this will affect both statements and the cash flows. And the unfortunate bit about it is that it leads to a loss in market capitalization. Yeah.
That was a very well detailed definition and elaboration on that category. Now, I've noticed that in all the categories, you've mentioned companies, organizations. So my question is fraud only committed against organizations, or can fraud also committed against individuals? Mr. Eric Onyango, kindly assist us on that as well.
Thank you, Shalima. Fraud can both be committed against an individual and also an organization or an institution. So it's not limited to an organization, even for individuals. Yes.
Okay, Mr. Mike, when Mr. Eric Onyango was defining the first two categories of fraud, he mentioned the words stealing, he mentioned the words abuse of power, he mentioned the words authority. Now, what is the difference between fraud, abuse, and waste?
Fraud, let me just maybe explain the fraud. Fraud, it is an illicit activity which is caused by fraudsters to the victims, or the victims might be the organizations and also individuals or groups. So fraud, it has the aspect of gaining what you are not supposed to gain in a fraudulent way. So that is now the meaning of fraud based on that. Yeah.
So two major elements have to be there for fraud to exist: concealment of information, false representation.
Yes.
What is the difference between fraud and abuse?
When it comes to,
because I believe someone to abuse power, someone has to conceal or make a false representation, to my understanding, unless you prove me wrong on that.
Yeah, when it comes to abuse, maybe I may leave that to Martha to explain.
Martha, kindly assist us in understanding the difference between fraud and abuse.
Okay, so one thing about abuse is that there is no, the outcome per se will not be related, or rather directly related to a gain for the person. It could be, let me give an example of an abuse of an asset. Okay, it's not right in an organization, right? But it hasn't been done to the benefit of somebody. Yeah. So abuse directly may not lead, it may lead to loss, it will lead to a loss in an item or in a certain aspect in the organization, but it hasn't directly led to a gain to the person who commits it.
Much understood, much understood. But now there is waste. What's the, now I've understood the difference between fraud and abuse, but what is waste? Mr. Mike, Mr. Martha, Mike, kindly do assist us in elaborating the same.
I can pick on that. We had started with fraud being an intentional act. But when you cross over to waste, there is now the thoughtless. There is no intent. So we can draw the line and differentiate between fraud and waste by looking at the intention, where for fraud there is the intent, but for waste it's very thoughtless. For lack of a better word, I would say careless. Waste will also be activities that do not promote operational excellence.
Oh, well noted, Mr. Eric. Well noted. Now, you've mentioned that fraud is not only committed against organizations, but can also be committed against individuals. Now, back to organizations. How does fraud affect corporate organizations, Mr. Eric? How does fraud affect corporate organizations?
Thank you, Shalima. Fraud can affect organizations financially because the extant data or literature suggests that organizations on average lose 5% of their revenue. So that has a direct impact on the organization because most of their revenue, if they do not put in place good controls, the percentage can go high, even to 20%, 30%. But if they put good controls, the percentage can reduce maybe to 1%, 2%, and it has that direct effect to organization. There's also the human impact. Today, if myself is defrauded in any company, I would have that fear that I do not want to experience that again. So it has a direct impact on plans of organizations, especially in the BFSI, the banking, financial services, and even insurance industries. There is a lot of trust that is placed on the company or by the clients. So if anybody experiences a fraud, then they would be having that fear of transacting again with the company.
So, since fraud can result to distorted markets, is it possible to say that fraud can drive out legitimate businesses? Mr. Simon.
Okay, thank you very much. There are various ways fraud can drive legitimate businesses out of business or cause undue advantage to some at the expense of others. Number one, as Erica said, according to the ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, a typical organization loses 5% of their annual revenue. That is as a result of a study they have done over 10 years consecutively, I think since 1985, somewhere there. And that means if a company, if an organization can lose 5% of its annual revenue to fraud, and as Erica said, with the time, if nothing is done to mitigate that situation, that can go to 20-50%. What will happen if a company cannot generate revenue? It will collapse. That's one way fraud can drive a company out of business. Number two is reputation. If, as you said, he doesn't feel safe being a customer of a certain organization, then he will be a competitor. If the customer moves to a competitor, then the losing entity will end up running out of business, because if every customer moves out, then what happens? They have no revenue.
So what you're saying, the company where the investor, or rather the client, was not feeling safe, was feeling that there is fraud being performed in that particular organization, then he moves out to another business. How is that driving out that company? How is that company a legitimate business being driven out of the market?
Okay, let me start somewhere. Reputation and fraud are bedfellows. They sleep on the same bed. Meaning, if fraud happens, most likely it will wake up the bedfellow, who is the reputation. Because, say, if there is a fraud in a certain organization, you might see the regulator rolling into action and the media coming in. If the media comes in, then it brings this information to the fore. Or there is a court case, and it gains the interest of the media. The media, of course, you know what they are good at. So what happens to the customers who didn't know that that was happening in that organization? They will learn of it and they'll go to the competition. That's what I meant.
Oh, that's what you meant. Okay, I had somehow related it to our example as lawyers. You see, most people out there believe that all lawyers are cons. I don't know the authenticity of that, because I believe I'm not a con here, unless someone wants to differ on the same.
And also just to add on that, in terms of how it affects corporate organizations, we have where sometimes illegitimate business can get a competitive advantage because of their dealings. From the outside, you may not be able to tell that indeed it's fraudulent, yeah? So sometimes they may get competitive advantage, which ends up driving out the legitimate businesses in the industry.
Okay, Faith, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I can actually add on the business risk impacts on corporate organizations. What do I mean by business risk? So since the fraud has already occurred, remember there are elements that need to be undertaken by the organization that is the recipient of this fraud, such as risk assessments. There is the investigation, there is the prosecution. So there is the associated cost emanating from the fraud. So basically that also impacts. We put it as a business risk to this particular organization associated to the fraud that has occurred.
So it's a financial impact on the industry, on the company.
At the end of the day, it drills down to be a financial impact due to the business. Because now what happens, they have to set up an anti-fraud program which involves all these elements at a cost. Yeah.
Noted. Now moving on, I believe that a systematic examination or inquiry based on a general understanding is referred to as an investigation. Mr. Eric Onyango, kindly give us a general overview of the investigation process.
Thank you, Shalima. I would begin because today we on the corporate organization. So basically, as investigators in these various multi-sector industries, we have developed a system of responding to all our clients' needs, and this is. We'll start by when we receive a request to conduct an investigation. We would respond seeking clarifications and requesting also our client to substantiate the allegation. Thereafter, once we've seen the scope, we would scope the matter, then develop a team. Because various allegations would call for various expertise, we would set up a team that would be part and parcel of that investigation. Then we'll proceed to doing a preliminary assessment.
Okay.
Thereafter, an investigation process can start. And investigation process would basically start from identifying material issues that you would want to focus on the allegation. You will also, after identifying them, you will preserve them because you are working towards collecting evidence. When you preserve them, you now have to collect them. After collecting them, you can do an examination, an analysis, and finally a report. So we would follow those systematic approach to address the issue based on the circumstances and come to a conclusion with a detailed report that you can use in court to defend your matter, and we can also appear as expert witnesses in that matter.
Mr. Mike, well, I believe Mr. Eric Onyango has taken us through the investigation process. Do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think Eric has tackled the process well, but in investigation, again, what we also have to maintain is something called the chain of custody. So chain of custody in the sense that in each process, you have to make sure that there is no contamination in the process, so that when you are coming up with the report, it has a watertight report which is admissible in the court of law, as Erica said.
Yes, Mr. Simon, do you have anything to add on the investigation process?
Yes, Shalima. That is the process. I would want to mention on how investigations are measured in the corporate environment.
Kindly.
Number one is on recovery. Because as we say, in most cases of fraud, there is a financial loss. Has the investigation recovered the amount lost? Recovery can be done in many ways. And that takes me to number two. You can recover the actual cash. You can also do what we call restitution from the insurance, because you know the risk of fraud sometimes is transferred to a third party, given its magnitude and its likelihood of occurrence. So the investigation you've done, has it tried to lay the facts properly for a claim with the insurance that will most likely sail through and ensure you recover? The third one is process improvement. As you know, fraud exploits control weaknesses in an organization. Has the investigation identified the control weaknesses that were exploited by the thief or the fraudster or the threat? And what have you recommended to fix these control lapses? So those are the three yardsticks that are normally used to measure the outcomes of any investigation, the corporate environment.
Thank you, Mr. Simon, for that well-detailed additional information. Now, I believe fraud investigation is a type of investigation that is part of a company's fraud control strategy. So what exactly does it entail, fraud investigations? What exactly does it entail? Mr. Eric.
Thank you, Shalima. Just like you said, to begin, every sound organization or institution need to put in place fraud risk management system in place, and this will usually look into issues, governance, that's developing policies, anti-fraud policies. It would also recommend for things like risk assessments, also putting in place prevention measures, detection measures, and laying a platform where if you fail to prevent, you fail to detect, you now call for an investigation to actually respond now to what had failed to be prevented, to be detected. So just like we were saying, you need the fraud expert in this process to assist you develop these policies, recommend good or sound prevention strategies, detection, and also to come conduct trainings, because there are times when awareness is actually needed. People might have, or organizations might have in place very good fraud risk management, but no one is actually adhering to these processes. So you would go to an extent of now creating the awareness so that they can effectively develop policies, effectively do risk assessments, effectively do prevention detection, and also select the best teams to respond through an investigation.
Okay, you've mentioned the issue of expert investigators looking into cases. So I have a question, Mr. Eric. Where is it enough to compel an investigator to look into a matter where a bank has proceeded and gone ahead to sell a security at an auction at a forced sale value, which there was an undervalue in it? So if a bank proceeds to undervalue a property for the sake of selling it at a forced sale value to which they are comfortable with, is that enough to compel investigators to look into the matter?
For sure, just like you've alleged, and we said you allege must substantiate. And the only way you can do this is to institute an investigation. So either way, you would request for an investigation so that you can collect evidentiary issues that can support or substantiate the allegation that you are making. So an investigator is really critical in that process to sieve through and also give an independent recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Eric.
Shalima, just to add on something in what some of the things you have to put in place for you to prevent the investigation. Yes, my colleague Eric has already explained well, but remember also that when you are putting all these mechanisms, you have to make sure that they meet the international standards, so that when there is a review from the regulators, they will find that you are within their framework. Yeah.
Mr. Simon, looks like you want to add something on that. Do you have anything to say?
I think my colleagues have done justice to that question, so I would have nothing to add at the moment.
Okay, moving on. Mr. Simon, I believe there are several techniques that can be employed in the process of investigations. What techniques can you employ to investigate traditional, cyber-enabled and cyber-dependent fraud?
Number one, I normally say that any investigation is a project. So the rules that govern a project applies to an investigation. I also say at the beginning, there is no small or big investigation, because a small investigation can be the tip of an iceberg, that beneath the sea or the lake lies the major issue. So you approach any issue. Of course, there is what we call predication initially. Okay, what are the facts in that issue? What is the allegation? What is involved in terms of amount and people? At that point, then you can determine whether that meets the threshold of a full-blown investigation. But
so whatever you've said cuts across all the three techniques.
Pardon?
Whatever you've said.
Yes.
Cuts across all the three techniques: traditional, cyber-enabled, and cyber-dependent.
Yes, I said it's a project management, and this is what I was now going to mention and saying. If then you're doing a traditional investigation that cuts across those three areas, then you have to have a team of people, and under each person is responsibilities. For example, I'd go to the expert, the person who can be able to do digital forensics. If there is an electronic gadget that was a victim of a crime or was used to perpetrate a crime, then I would allocate it to him. Please image this device, analyze the data there. These are the keywords you're going to search for. Once you strike or you have hits of where you found these keywords, then let's analyze them. Traditional, say, investigations of interviewing people, interrogating suspects, then that would go to a typical investigator who can be able to extract information from people, given their experience and expertise, and any other person. So you as a project manager is you who is saying this is the need of the investigation at this time, and this is the resource that can satisfy that need. That's why I said it's a project. And the project management skills comes in with timelines and clear expectations.
Mr. Mike, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, yes, Shalima, one thing which you have to understand when you are doing when you are trying to tackle these techniques, one, we have the cyber-enabled techniques. So let me explain these cyber-enabled techniques. Cyber-enabled techniques, these are crimes which happens without the support of the systems. The systems, I mean the computers, the network, but they can as well be transformed by the assist of the system.
You mean the computers and other related devices?
Yes. So the cyber-enabled is a situation whereby you realize that the crime which a fraudster is causing, yes, he or she can proceed with it, but in the essence, because nowadays we are also living in the digital era, he can use the platform. That is where now the network to transform the process into a bigger picture. And that is why when I'm explaining that, for example, you will go to now the cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is an example of computer enabled crime. cyberbullying, you realize that people are using social media, and I'm only saying that most of us, we don't understand how we use the social media, because only people depends in social media. It is about the people, process, and the technology. And you realize that the technology, which is now the cyberspace, is only contribute to 20%. And now the people who are now the initiators, because people are where fraudster comes from. They are the categories of fraudsters. You will realize that they are using now the technology to cause harm or to frustrate their opponents. Their opponents, I mean the victims. And that is why you realize that if someone is borrowing, maybe trying to filtrate my information, then he is using my information into a public platform, social media platform, for me now to not to gain confidence, and also just trying to bull me. That is why we call the cyberbullying. At the same time, you also have maybe the
so when investigating cyberbullying, you have to employ that technique, cyber-enabled fraud.
Correct. And also there are many tools, as Simon has said, when you are dealing with now the cyber crimes, there are also many tools and also the process and expertise which you have to acquire. Because, for instance, where maybe you are doing the child trafficking, remember, child trafficking, it can come in the angle where maybe a parent is giving the child the machine, like the machine learning devices to understand or to learn something. You will realize that maybe this child is getting communication from an intruder who is an unknown person, but they are in the same social media platform. And maybe it can be used to maybe send undeceptive images, which is not even worth maybe sharing with that kind of a tender age. So all that scenarios, you have to understand how this communication goes back and forth. And that is why we also have to understand the three handshake aspect of communication. So there are many factors, even in terms of now the businesses, in corporate businesses. When you come about to now the markets, there are people who will use the fake market or maybe the fraudulent market to defraud people. You realize nowadays even most of the counties are going through the for example, like what is happening in Middle East. You remember someone is just saying that, okay, we have the jobs in a certain continent or in a certain country, but this is the categories of the people we want. The only thing maybe you guys can do, you just send me your information so that at least I can help you to get this job. So they are really guaranteed you that you are going to get. And at the same time, once already identified you, your weakness, your vulnerability, they will tell you everything is okay, but now the only thing which is remaining is only just to, as an individual, you to contribute 20, maybe 20,000. Once you've contributed 20,000, you are going to get the confirmation letter, and I'll organize you how you travel, not knowing that you are being conned, you are being you are being paid something which is not illegal. So are you seeing it has gone to that aspect? And that is why we were saying the person is using technology to re-engineering and also to make sure that the process is compact and it is going to be successful. And that is why we are saying they are the crimes which they don't necessarily happening with a computer network or a systems network, but they can only use that to transform it into
out and out. Understanding, Mr. Mike.
Yeah.
If I understood you correctly.
Yes.
So, cyber-enabled fraud is a technique that has to be used when computers and other related devices are involved.
Yes.
It has to be used.
Yes.
There's no way you can avoid using that technique whenever they are related and computer devices involved.
Yes. And
so that is cyber-enabled fraud. I believe we have tackled two techniques so far: traditional fraud and cyber-enabled fraud. There is a third technique, I believe, to this cyber-dependent fraud. Mr. Mike, kindly elaborate to us in a language that we can all understand. What is cyber-dependent fraud?
Thank you, Shalima. Now, when it comes to cyber-dependent fraud, as the name sounds, these are the crimes which can only happen by use of computer and networked. And
by use of computers?
Yes.
Remember, you had also said that cyber-enabled fraud can also...
Cyber-enabled does not depend on the use of computer, but you can only use the computer to transform it. I think the difference.
Okay.
It is not depending on the computer, but cyber dependent, it is a must. You have to use a communication device, a computer. It has to be within the network environment. To investigate.
There is no way you can initiate an investigation process without using a computer.
No,
in
and
cyber dependent fraud.
Yes, and even when they are happening, they are happening in the environment of a networked environment. An environment where they are it is networked, there are systems, there are computers, there are users. At the same times, they are victims. Victims are also the same users, but remember, sometimes victims are always very innocent. They fall into these traps unknowingly. So cyber dependent, for example, most of the most companies or most corporates are really falling under this first, because you remember, I can decide to send an application, what is called maybe ransomware, to a certain corporate. So what this application will do, it will take the full control of the environment. So once it takes the full control of the environment, remember, I'll be now there, I'll be in control, like the one who will now be behind these controls. Then I can decide to liaise with now, for example, the management of that corporates, because remember what Eric and my colleagues have said, that the corporates fear the reputation damage. At the same time, they fear that if their reputation has gone to the public badly, then they will lose financial. So that is why they will decide, I'll call, maybe I can call the management, say, I'm in full control of your data. Remember, data is information and data is power information. Then we will negotiate that for me to release, because once I've already controlled it, I'll encrypt it, in the sense that I'll be the person to give you the decryption key. The decryption is now the key which you can use to reverse the files, the information. So I'll call the management, then I'll say that for me to have an agreement, I need 50 million. So pay me 50 million, then I release your data. That is how ransomware work. At the same time, I can use a technique of hacking. Remember, I've said that they are the crimes which are being convicted or committed within the network environment. Network environment in the sense that, for example, most of corporates, most of their operations, they work under systems and also network environment. In network environment, we have the external and internal. So as a hacker, I can decide to hack the institution. Once I hack the institution, I can hack it maybe through a user or maybe through a remote access. It depends with how they put the security mechanism within their network. Once I hack, I'll be able to control some of the, for example, if it is a financial institution, I can decide to hack and also direct the DB, and I can even identify the transaction table, where a transaction table is a table which also has most of the details for the transactions. So once I've already hacked, the company will lose trust, they will lose confidence in themselves, because they have already been hit. So they will now engage the experts, which my colleagues have talked about, so that these people have the techniques to investigate this process, the hacking, and also find the root of the
well, Mr. Mike, you've mentioned the word hacking.
Yes.
Well, I believe in this country, in Kenya, I believe our constitution provides that there is a right to privacy.
Yes.
And whenever someone goes against that right, violates that right together with our constitution. And I believe that is the same case scenario with all the other countries in this world.
Yes.
So how is it that you people, the investigators, are allowed to hack into other people's systems in order to investigate? Do you have a license which gives you the right to do so? Because at the end of the day, it still goes down that road that you are violating the right to privacy provided for in our constitution.
Thank you, Shalima. One aspect, the hacking comes from the fraudsters, intruders, which are the fraudsters. Then, for the investigators, for the experts, before we even commence the process of investigation within a fraud which has happened within the system, there is something called the agreement, the non-disclosure agreement, because the client or the corporate, the person who is the victim, has to give you the consent. Once they are giving you the consent, you will also be able to maintain what is called maintain the Data Privacy Act. And also you make sure that whatever you are engaging into the contract, it is being tackled very well, and how you are going to handle their data. Because when you are doing the forensic imaging, remember, you are you are imaging their data. It is not your data, but their data. So when you are even going to analyze also and examine this data for you to come up with the report, you already have the concept. The first place, you must have a non-disclosure agreement. And again, when you're talking about the investigators hacking, remember hacking, we have 3 modes of hacking. There are hacking, which we have the black hacking, the gray hacking. At the same time, we also have the white hacking. So as investigators, we are the white hacking. White hacking in the sense that whatever we are penetrating in that environment, the incident, it is allowed legally. It is legally allowed with our constitution, because there is consent, you are qualified, you know how to handle data, that. So black hacker, they are now the fraudsters who does it without illegally, they do it illegally.
So for example, if someone hires you to investigate me, for example, you are allowed, since you're a white hacker, you're allowed to log into my Facebook account and Instagram account to check my text and everything.
It depends with the type of the crime you have, but sometimes, remember, once now I've come, you've hired me as an investigator to come to investigate a fraud that has happened in the system. I remember even if it is an individual, groups or systems, they have their representatives. So these representatives, they are the people who will also liaise with you when you want to access this. For example, if maybe I want to access your server, I can access your server in the presence of the technical people you have, if you are a corporate. If you are not, if it is your phone, I'll be able to access your phone with your consent. Yeah, with your consent. So that is how it is. So if you hire me,
see, if I give you the consent to intrude into my devices and gather information, that is not a violation of the right to privacy.
It is not, because
but you've mentioned the word hacking. You know, hacking is when you get into someone else's information without that person's right.
Hacking, that is why I'm saying hacking, we have different ways of hacking, and that is why I'm saying as a private and also as a professional investigators, we can use the white hacking. We are the white hackers. White hackers, we are being guided by law.
Let's assume I'm an employee in a company.
Yes.
And I liaise and conspire with my other colleagues to steal from the company.
Yes.
And instead of using text or calling each other, we tend to use social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, which you have to have a username and login details, like a password, in order to access the information that is in there. Yeah. So will you proceed to hack into my Facebook or Twitter account to check the information which we had communicated initially on how to fraud the company, or will you come to me, take me to the police station and compel me, or rather force me to provide you with my login details?
Remember, if you look at now, when responding to that, remember when my colleague Eric was explaining the investigation process, he started by saying you have to engage the client. By engaging the clients means that you are getting a consent. Yeah, you are getting a consent. So if it is like that, for example, also I think when I'm using the hard hacking, it is somehow hard, but hacking, another name of hacking is accessing the information with legally. So the people are not accessing the information, the people are using illegal means of accessing the information. Those are now there. That is now they're hacking, but they're using it in a negative way. So in that instance, yes, if I have the consent, I'll be able to access based on what is the what is the basic of the investigation, and what is the outcome, what is the objective.
Thank you, Mr. Mike, for that well elaborated explanation. Before we go on to a break, let's refresh on whatever we have discussed in this last hour. You've mentioned the issue of cyberbullying. What is the threshold of proving cyberbullying? How prosecutable is the offense in Kenya?
Yes, cyberbullying. Yes, it is a technique which is actually it is common, and with the technology is going, it is very common. Now the threshold, it is difficult to measure the threshold, but you can just use a sample, because even right now today, within 1 hour of today, we don't know how many people have been bullied through the cyberbullying. Yes. So we can only maybe use a sample, but to give at least the measure, just to allege. But you cannot just say this is the exact measurement of this. But what I can say in terms of that, it is techniques which is it is really affecting people. More so in terms of cyberbullying, the people whom are really affected much are the people who lack information. At the same time, the old people.
Give me an example of cyberbullying, Mr. Mike. One example of cyberbullying.
One example of cyberbullying, you can have my image. For example, sometimes maybe we went with you somewhere, maybe in a relaxing place, and maybe we were taking something, and at the same time maybe I did not behave well. For example, maybe there was somebody who was taking that, recording that video. So I may even decide that maybe when I'm accessing the media or the social media platform, I'm just finding my images there like this, and now it has gone to that. At the same time, when I say that, maybe you can even persuade me to maybe share the informations which I ought not to share because maybe I was under something, or maybe you just persuaded me and I gave out. So yeah, I believe
some examples are stronger than others, right?
Yes.
Since some examples are stronger than others, then there has to be a threshold. For example, if I post a picture of you drunk,
yeah,
okay, and I post a picture of you being, for example, in a beach with your girlfriend or with your wife or
yes,
anything whatsoever, there has to be a difference between the two. There has to be a threshold.
Yes.
So which one, how prosecutable it is?
The process is the same for in terms of the prosecution, but also it will also depend with the degree of the damage, from the victim.
Because so it's like the offense of abusing drugs in Kenya, whether you are caught with 1 bag of cannabis and 10 bags of cannabis, the punishment is the same.
It's the same according to, it depends according to the prosecution and also with the court. I think, for example, there is no small crime and big crime.
A crime is a crime.
Once a crime is a crime.
Thank you, Mr. Mike, for that information. Now, just a general question before we close this first session of the webinar. Between the 3 financial statements, balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow statement, which one is more prone to fraudster to tamper with?
So, the one that can be easily manipulated is mostly the income statement, which records the revenues and the expenses. It's very easy to overstate a revenue, and especially if there is no supporting document, that can pass, because it will show that there is a high net profit or high profit, while indeed there is no. When it comes to one thing I have to state is that these 3 statements, first of all, they are related. Whatever happens in the income statement will in some way affect the cash flow statement, because revenues are cash flow to the company, yeah? And whatever, like, let's say we have account receivables on the statement of financial positions, in the income statement, these are revenues, either claimed or set to be or set to be cash flows at some point. So these statements may be interrelated, but the income statement is very easy to manipulate.
Well, thank you, Martha. I can see Mr. Eric wants to comment something on that as well, but because of time, we'll have to take a break. We'll continue in the second session of the webinar. Thank you very much.